The light from the fireplace dances in flickering movements across the spines of old leather-bound books. The rich scent of black tea, blending with the pungent aroma of dry printing ink, begins to fill the quiet space of the room. You are sitting there, in a thick, misty afternoon of 18th century Scotland. Outside the window, the cobblestone streets of Edinburgh are gradually sinking into the darkness of time. Listening to the wind whistling through the door creaks like the whispers of great thoughts waiting to be awakened. You feel the weight of the wool cloak on your shoulders. Feel the gentle fatigue of a mind that has traveled through thousands of pages. We are not here to race against the hands of the clock. We are here to step back together against the flow of history, returning to an era of flickering candlelight and minds that shook entire empires. You are that very man, an absent-minded scholar with eyes that always look through the invisible laws of humanity, a shy soul, but carrying within the power to reshape how the world operates. Let the warmth of this room envelop you. Let your breathing slow down to the steady ticking of the pendulum clock on the wall. Our journey begins from the salty sea mists of a coastal town, where a fatherless boy prepares to take his first steps into history. You feel the relaxation spreading from your feet to the crown of your head. The modern world out there is receding. Only here remains you and the distant memories of a great life, starting from a day in June 1723, when the first church bells rang out to welcome you into this world. The cold from the holy water trickles down your forehead, a sharp and pure sensation in the silence of the Kirkcaldy Parish Church. It is June 5th, 1723. The echo of murmuring prayers blends with the rhythmic sound of waves crashing from the sea beyond. You are lying in warm arms, but around you is a strange stillness. The man who should have stood there, smiling and naming you, is gone. Your father, also Adam Smith, passed away before you could see the first light of this earth. That loss was not loud. It was like a mist covering the house on High Street, where his stacks of legal files and customs documents still lay, silently. A bitter contrast between the beginning of a new life and the end of a mature one. You enter this world with a name inherited from a ghost, but it is that very absence that created a space for the great ideas of later years to flourish. The hands holding you tight, giving you warmth and life, belong to your mother, Margaret Douglas. You feel her heartbeat, steady and constant, like an anchor amidst the storm of widowhood. She was not just a mother, she was your entire world in those early, sickly years. Descending from the prestigious Strathendry landowning lineage, she carried a quiet pride and a sharp intellect. In the small parlor filled with the scent of tea and pine, she read stories to you, teaching you to observe the world not with judgment, but with empathy. Morality is not dry dogma. Her voice seemed to pour into your mind. Morality is how we see ourselves in the eyes of others. In the late afternoons, when the weak Scottish sunlight slanted through the window, you saw your mother skillfully maintain social connections. She was the embodiment of the middle class that you would later honor. Not so luxurious as to be blind, not so poor as to be stripped of dignity. It was here, in her arms, that the first seed of the impartial spectator was sown, an inner observer who always adjusts their behavior according to fairness and empathy. There is a faint memory, like a nightmare that has receded, but still leaves a ripple in the consciousness. It was the year you turned 3. You were in Strathondry, strolling along the gentle banks of the River Leven. The scent of wild grass mingled with the smell of damp mud. Suddenly, unfamiliar faces appeared. Romani nomads with tattered clothes and deep eyes picked you up. Your cries were drowned out by the sound of hurried footsteps on dry leaves in the Leslie Woods. The irony of fate is clear in this moment. A mind that would reshape the entire economic structure of the modern world nearly vanished into the ancient forests, becoming a wandering tinker across the roads of Europe. If a passing traveler had not sounded the alarm, if your mother had not found you sobbing under a tree as the nomad woman fled, then history would have taken a completely different turn. Later, when people mocked your absent-mindedness, they said, "He would have made, I fear, a poor gypsy." But perhaps that very experience of being detached from the social order for a few brief hours taught you the value of freedom and the invisible threads that keep society from falling apart. You grew up with a fragile body, vulnerable to the salt winds from the North Sea. But in return, your inner world was an endless maze. You began to have strange fits of absent-mindedness. There were times you stood motionless in the middle of the street, eyes fixed on a void, while other children chased each other around coal sacks. You were muttering to yourself, smile, in rapt conversation with invisible companions. The people of Kirkcaldy looked at you and whispered about a peculiar boy, but they did not know that, in your head, numbers, images, and laws were beginning to arrange themselves. You were not alone. You were in dialogue with ideas that had no names yet. You were learning to detach yourself from physical reality, to touch the essence of things. Your absent-mindedness was actually an extreme focus on things the naked eye could not see, like an invisible hand leading your thoughts through the chaos of everyday life. Listen to the sounds of Kirkcaldy. The Lang Tune. With only a single street running along the coast, the clanging, rhythmic beat of hammers from the naileries echoed from early morning until sunset. You often stood outside the workshop doors, breathing in the smell of hot iron and the pungent smoke of coal. You observed the workers, their hands rising and falling with mechanical precision. One man draws out the wire, another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it. You recognize an interesting paradox. None of them could produce a complete nail quickly on their own, but when they divided the work, thousands of tiny, shiny nails were born every day. This was the omen for the theory of the division of labor that you would write decades later. Those nails were not just items, they were the cells of a growing economic organism. You saw ships docking at the harbor, carrying timber from the Baltic and tobacco from afar. Money was not something abstract on your father's customs papers. It was the smell of the sea, the haggling of merchants, the mutual dependence between the blacksmith and the fisherman. You realized that no one needs to command this town to function. The needs of each individual naturally create a harmonious order. Every morning, you walked on the worn stones of the Berg School, carrying thick books of Latin. Headmaster David Miller, with his stern face and echoing voice, led you into the world of Cicero, Livy, and the Stoics. You immersed yourself in complex grammatical structures, treating them as an intellectual game. By the age of 7, you were fluent in reading Latin, and by 10, you had begun to explore texts that even elders would shy away from. The school was a dry intellectual desert for many, but for you, it was an oasis. You learned that a person's value lies not only in intellect, but also in public virtue. However, amidst the shouting schoolyard, you remained a solitary figure. You did not join in the physical games. You preferred to stand by the window, looking out at the harbor and reflecting on the workings of the world. Your incredible memory was absorbing everything, from Roman moral lessons to practical customs figures. You were a genius accumulating energy, waiting for a day to explode. At 14, you stood before the gate of your old house, looking at the long street of Kirkcaldy one last time. The wind from the sea blew hard, fluttering the hem of your thick wool coat. Your mother stood there, her eyes sad, but full of pride. You knew that this small town had given you enough of the first bricks. The naileries, the ships, the Latin books, and the boundless love of your mother had molded who you were. You felt a strong inner urge, an irrepressible curiosity about what lay beyond the Scottish hills. You stepped into the waiting carriage, feeling the jolt of the wheels on the trail. The sound of horse hooves on the stone road began to quicken, pulling you away from the salty salt mist of Kirkcaldy. You leaned your head against the side of the carriage, letting the shadows of the trees on both sides of the road glide past your face, heading toward a promising Glasgow. The shaking of the carriage gradually subsides, replaced by the slow clatter of wooden wheels grinding against the rough stones of High Street. You sense an atmosphere entirely different from Kirkcaldy. No longer just the simple scent of salt, but a pungent mixture of coal smoke, freshly sawn wood, and a strange musky scent of dried tobacco leaves blowing in from across the ocean. Glasgow, in 1737, appears before you, not in silent pictures, but in a bustling overflow of life. You, a 14-year-old boy in simple wool clothes, step down from the carriage, feeling truly small amidst the imposing gray stone buildings of the University of Glasgow. Ancient walls built in the 15th century stand tall like giants guarding the treasures of human knowledge. But within that stillness of stone, an electric current of new thought is silently passing through. You walk, hands trembling slightly from the chill of the Scottish morning, but your heart is beating fast with an unnamed expectation. Scotland is no longer an isolated land. The Act of Union in 1707 has flung wide the gates to the world, and Glasgow is the funnel receiving those flows. You find yourself at the epicenter of an intellectual earthquake called the Scottish Enlightenment, an era where blind faith in old dogmas is shaken by the power of reason and empirical evidence. At the University of Glasgow, you are not forced to rote learn dry Latin passages or gloomy theological formulas. Instead, the air here is filled with debate. Less emphasis on rote learning, more on critical thinking. You hear arguments echoing from hallway corners, from the ramshackle coffee houses around the campus. There, people do not ask, "What does the Bible say?" but "What is the truth?" You begin to breathe the air of freedom, where a fatherless boy from a small town also has the right to doubt even the highest authorities if they are not proven by logic. Each step you take on the cold stone corridors is a step deeper into the maze of logic, metaphysics, and mathematics. You feel your mind like a parched land receiving the first rains of the season, soaking in and beginning to sprout a passion for the philosophical concepts of reason, civil liberties, and the freedom of speech. And then You enter the classroom of Francis Hutcheson, a room flooded with light slanting through high windows, where tiny dust motes dance in the air. His appearance is an electric shock to your soul. Instead of sitting silently behind a soaring pulpit and reading sleepy Latin lectures, Hutcheson walks ceaselessly between the rows of seats. He wears a dark cloak, but his face radiates a strange enthusiasm. He spoke passionately, gestured dramatically, engaged his students in dialogue. His voice echoes, not in the dead language of the past, but in the vivid English of the present. You feel as if a thick curtain has just been drawn back. To you, he is a never-to-be-forgotten. Hutcheson does not teach you how to be a reclusive monk. He teaches you how to be a human being in society. He challenges dark Calvinist notions of man's original depravity. Instead, he plants in your heart a brilliant belief that humans possess an innate moral sense. You sit there, silently in the corner of the class, eyes following every gesture of the teacher. You hear him speak of how we are not merely greedy and selfish creatures, naturally feel sympathy for others, and are drawn toward actions that promote the common good. The concept of sympathy begins to spin in your mind like an axle. You suddenly realize that society is not a disjointed pile of sand, but a living organism linked by invisible emotional threads. Hutcheson introduces you to the science of man, treating morality and politics as having operating laws as precise as Newton's planets. You begin to see the beauty of natural liberty, the idea that each individual is a distinct universe, having the right to pursue happiness without an arbitrary hand pointing the way. In the afternoons after class, you often stand alone by the library window, looking out at the crimson horizon. Hutcheson's words on morality, sympathy, and trust are silently crystallizing, forming the foundation for the first book you will later write about moral sentiments. You realize that philosophy does not lie in dusty books, but in the very beat of the human heart. But your world is not just made of pages. Step out of the university gates and head toward the Glasgow docks, where the River Clyde groans under the weight of ocean-going vessels. You see the tobacco lords walking majestically through the main streets. They wear brilliant scarlet cloaks, a symbol of extreme wealth. The sound of coopering hammers, the shouts of laborers unloading crates of tobacco from Virginia, the pungent smell of tar and pine create a symphony of commerce. In Kirkcaldy, you saw nails, but in Glasgow, you see the market. Money here is no longer abstract numbers written in Latin on your father's papers. You can smell it in the salty air, hear it in the sharp haggling at the warehouses. You observe how a merchant uses credit to buy goods, how prices rise and fall like the tide according to the needs of those across the ocean. Glasgow becomes a massive laboratory for your intellect. You begin to wonder, what keeps this commotion from turning into chaos? No king stands here to command what each ship must carry, or how much each worker must do. And yet, everything operates smoothly. Individual self-interest appears before you as a powerful engine. The merchant in that red cloak does not trade tobacco to save anyone's soul. He does it for himself, but in the process, he creates jobs, brings goods, and drives the whole city forward. A spontaneous order is taking shape in your thoughts, a miraculous intersection between Hutcheson's moral theory and the raw reality of commerce. Amidst that clamor, you are still you, a young scholar full of contradictions. You are frequently caught walking along the river, but your mind is in another universe. Those states of absent-mindedness become more and more frequent. Once, you were walking to the lecture hall, and suddenly stopped in the middle of the street, standing motionless for 10 minutes just to pursue an argument about property rights. People around glide past, some chuckling, some looking curiously at the student with large, dreamy eyes. You often mutter to yourself, smiling at invisible friends. Your friends now are Aristotle, Cicero, the concepts of supply and demand that are gradually becoming clear. You lose track of conversations mid-sentence, making your peers find you quite odd. They see you as a socially clumsy fool, but the professors see a fire of genius smoldering behind that bewildered exterior. His classmates found him strange. His professors found him brilliant. You spend hours in a cramped, rented room, beside a nearly burnt-out candle, recording reflections on human behavior in your notebooks. You are not only trying to observe human beings not only from the outside, but from their inner motivations. 3 years pass as quickly as a dream. Glasgow has taught you all it could. You have fully absorbed the essence of the Scottish Enlightenment. In 1740, when you are only 17, a great opportunity knocks. Thanks to your outstanding intellect and the warm recommendation of Professor Hutchison, you have won the prestigious Snell Exhibition Scholarship, a ticket taking you to Balliol College, Oxford. It is a reward for effort, but also a challenge. That scholarship was originally for those destined to be clergymen, a path that feels so alien to your free soul. However, the desire to expand horizons, to touch the massive libraries of England, wins out. You begin to pack up notebooks full of unfinished entries, frayed wool clothes. You go to say goodbye to your mother Margaret, who always watches you with gentle and steadfast eyes. Glasgow has synthesized your core value system: sympathy, trust, and the natural laws of the market. These seeds have taken deep root, waiting for the day to bloom brilliantly. You take a deep breath, sensing the coal smoke of Glasgow one last time before entering the new journey. The shadows of dusk begin to stretch long over the ground as you step into the carriage heading south. You feel the chill seep through your cloak. The sound of wheels grinding on the cobblestone road rises steadily, taking you away from your Scottish homeland toward the ancient stone spires and the somber atmosphere of Oxford. The sound of horse hooves beats steadily on the cobblestone road. Clatter, clatter. You are sitting on horseback, heading south, leaving behind the familiar mists of Glasgow to enter the territory of England. It is 1740, and you have just turned 17. The leather bag at the horse's side contains all your possessions: a few worn wool clothes, unfinished notebooks, and the certificate of the prestigious Snell Exhibition Scholarship. You feel the southern breeze begin to blow, carrying the scent of fertile fields and vast farms. Your eyes never stop observing. You notice a distinct difference. The roads here are flatter, wider, red brick houses nestled beside neatly trimmed hedges. Prosperity appears right before your eyes, through the richness of the soil and the orderliness of the infrastructure. You silently memorize these images, like vivid evidence of wealth that you will later use to decode the laws of nations. But behind that abundance, you also feel an invisible coldness. The gaze of the locals when they hear your Scottish accent. A suspicion, an underlying contempt for the Northerners coming to take opportunities at Oxford. You tighten the reins, feeling the solitude begin to seep into your skin as the silhouettes of the ancient stone spires of Balliol College appear on the horizon. As the heavy oak gates of Balliol College close behind you, a terrifying silence envelops the air. You had once expected an academic peak, a place where great ideas were vibrantly debated. But what greets you are only damp stone hallways and the smell of stagnation. This is not the Glasgow of Francis Hutcheson. Oxford is a fortress of conservatism, a Jacobite stronghold. You find yourself surrounded by medieval scholasticism, where young minds are forced into old molds, where absolute obedience is prioritized over creativity. You walk through the rooms, hearing the murmurs of rote-reading obsolete theological dogmas. The contrast is cruel. In Glasgow, you were taught to doubt. Here, you are forced to believe. You feel as if you are entering an intellectual desert, a place where time seems to have stopped centuries ago. You see the wealthy English students, wearing luxurious cloaks but with empty eyes. They are not here to learn, they are here to drink, gamble, and wait for a degree to enter the clergy or the government. That laziness is like a virus, eating away at the spirit of this school. And you, with a burning thirst for knowledge, feel like a strange creature lost on a dead planet. An enduring contempt for English schools begins to take root in your heart. You observe the professors, the people who should be the lighthouses leading the way, but in reality, they are only sluggish ghosts. In the University of Oxford, the greater part of the public professors have, for many years, given up altogether even the pretense of teaching. You see through the rotten core of this system with the eyes of a future economist. These institutions are supported by rich endowments. The professors' salaries are paid regardless of whether they teach or not, regardless of whether the students learn anything. When there is no financial motivation, when competition is completely stifled by monopoly, then decadence is the inevitable result. You see the ultimate irony. A place considered the elite of the empire is the very place that is the laziest. You stand in the middle of the schoolyard, watching the shadows of cloaks glide past in silence, and decide that you will not let yourself be buried in these ashes. He refused to enter the priesthood, a decision that makes you even more misplaced and alienated by the Balliol authorities. You withdraw, retreating deep into the shadows to seek your own light. Your only anchor now is the Bodleian Library, a cathedral of books. You enter it like a beggar who has found a treasure. The smell of old paper, leather, and the dust of time fills your chest. For 6 long years, you lived a reclusive life among the towering bookshelves. You teach yourself several subjects by reading many books from the shelves of the large Bodleian Library. You devour Descartes to understand systematic thinking, John Locke on natural rights, and Thomas Hobbes on the nature of power. On cold nights, when the candle in your room has run out, you still toil over pages of French and Italian. You teach yourself foreign languages not for show, but to directly converse with the great minds of Europe without going through distorted translations. You focus on purging it of Scoticisms. You want your voice to carry international stature, to be as sharp and precise as a blade. The brutal solitude of Oxford has become the smelting furnace, transforming a shy teenager into a thinker with cross-border vision. Every page you turn is a brick building a fortress of knowledge for yourself, where those lazy professors out there can never reach. But then, a scandal breaks out. It is 1744. You are secretly reading a book in your small room, a book titled A Treatise of Human Nature by a man named David Hume. Suddenly, the door bursts open. The school officials, whom you call the Reverend Inquisitors of Baal, rush in. They see the book in your hand, as if seeing a demon. To them, Hume is a heretic, an atheist seeking to destroy the moral foundation of the kingdom. The book is confiscated immediately. They punished him severely for reading it. But that prohibition only ignites a fire of skepticism stronger than ever. Hume's arguments that reason is a slave to the passions begin to echo in your mind. You realize that morality does not need theology to exist. It originates from psychology itself and the interaction between human beings. Oxford's punishment does not make you submit. It only makes you realize that you have completely detached from this old world view. You begin to build a system of your own, a system where humans are the center, not distant gods. Your health begins to collapse under the weight of isolation and mental pressure. The years without empathy, without intellectual conversation, have ravaged your fragile body. You write letters home to your mother, trembling lines containing ultimate misery. You begin to experience shaking fits. Sometimes you stand in the library and feel the whole world shaking around you. Doctors call it inveterate hypochondriasis. But you know, it is a nervous breakdown brought on by extreme loneliness. A violent scurvy that caused his teeth to shake attacks you. There are nights you lie in a cold room with no fire, feeling death lurking in the dark corners. Oxford is not just an intellectual desert, it is also a cemetery for your health. Discrimination because of your Scottish roots makes you feel like a stranger in the very homeland of the empire. The tension reaches its peak in 1746 when the Jacobite rebellion breaks out. The political atmosphere becomes suffocating and dangerous. You feel you are no longer safe among the conservative Tories who always look at you with resentful eyes. On a morning in August 1746, you make a sudden decision. You pack everything you have, your precious notebooks and your painful memories. You left Oxford in 1746, before his scholarship ended. You walk out of the gates of Balliol College without a university degree in hand, without any career direction for the future. At 23, you become an unemployed man returning to your mother. But in your soul, the 6 years of darkness at Oxford have left an invaluable legacy. You have seen firsthand the corruption of monopoly. You have seen the failure of a system without competition. You have understood that when the colleges had a monopoly on degrees, the professors had a monopoly on students. Quality will be killed. Oxford has unintentionally sharpened you into one of the greatest critical thinkers. You return to Scotland, carrying the seeds of freedom watered by your own tears and suffering. The sound of horse hooves rises again, this time heading north. You lean your back against the wooden carriage, feeling the gradually cooling wind of the Highlands welcoming you back. The shadows of the Oxford spires recede, giving way to the salty sea smell of Kirkcaldy waiting for you ahead. The scent of freshly baked oatcakes blending with the warmth of the fireplace in your mother's house in Kirkcaldy is the first thing to awaken your senses, which had grown numb after 6 long years in the south. You open your eyes to see the pale Scottish sunlight creeping through the small window, no longer the suffocating, dusty atmosphere of the Bodleian Library. You feel a gentle stillness envelop your body, which is still thin and frequently trembling with slight fits. It is 1746. You return as a failure in the eyes of the world, without a degree, without a career, carrying only a soul full of intellectual scars. Oxford has left in you a deep contempt for the lazy who hide behind privilege. In the University of Oxford, the greater part of the public professors have, for these many years, given up altogether even the pretense of teaching. You recall the lifeless faces of the professors there, who were paid handsomely to do nothing at all. The cruel contrast between the wealth of English institutions and their poverty of thought has become a costly lesson on monopoly that you are silently crystallizing in your mind. During the 2 years living under the protection of your mother, Margaret, you allowed violent fit of laziness to soothe your nervous tension. But in reality, it was not laziness. It was a period of incubation. You stand by the salty shore, muttering to yourself about Hume's forbidden works, about pages of French philosophy. You are piecing back together the fragments of your worldview, preparing for a rise that even you cannot yet fully imagine. The bells of St. Giles Cathedral echo through the steep, narrow alleys of Edinburgh as you set foot in this city in 1748. A letter from Lord Kames changed everything. You were invited to speak, not in rigid university lecture halls, but before a crowd of souls hungry for innovation. Edinburgh at this time is a city of mist and stone, where lawyers, ministers, and merchants gather in smoke-filled coffee houses to discuss the future. You stand at the podium, hands still trembling slightly, throat dry with anxiety. You are not a natural speaker. Your voice sometimes falters due to chronic shyness. But as you begin to speak about rhetoric, a strange change occurs. You do not teach them how to use the elaborate, flowery words of the Middle Ages. You teach them how to touch the minds of others, to communicate thought from one mind to another with as little distortion as possible. You observe the faces below. They are captivated, taking notes. You realize that language is not just words on paper. It is the breath of social communication. You see the shillings lying in the pockets of the merchants in the front row, and a stroke of genius hits you. You hold up a coin, its metal glinting under the candlelight. The offering of a shilling is in reality offering an argument to persuade, and in this manner, everyone is practicing oratory on others through the whole of his life. A delightful contrast. High rhetoric turns out to be the same as the act of buying and selling in the market. You have sown the first seed for the theory of commodity exchange that will later shake the world. Language is for persuasion, and economics is also about persuading others to give us what they have in exchange for what we provide. You smile, feeling confidence gradually return through every pause in your lecture. By 1750, your lectures have moved beyond the scope of literature to delve deep into the progress of opulence. You stand before the crowd and begin to dismantle the chains of mercantilism. You speak of the obvious and simple system of natural liberty. Your voice grows stronger as you criticize government intervention, monopoly privileges, and the tariff barriers that hinder growth. You see that wealth does not lie in gold bars stored in the king's treasury, but in the freedom of each individual when they are allowed to pursue their own interest under a fair system of laws. The weavers and the fishmongers of Edinburgh are the ones building the nation, not the officials in London. You begin to describe a world where order arises from freedom, a vision where opulence is the result of spontaneous cooperation. The first bricks of the wealth of nations are being laid right here in these rented lecture halls. amidst the smell of half-burnt candle wax and the sound of quill pens scratching on parchment. You feel you are no longer a lonely scholar. You are part of a great flow moving toward the light of reason. And then, fate smiled upon you one evening in 1750, when you officially met David Hume. A contrast could not be more distinct between the two of you. Hume walks into the room with a large, portly frame, his face radiating cheerfulness and the ability to attract all eyes with witty jokes. He is an extrovert, a lover of life and its pleasures, while you, a 27-year-old man, are thin, anxious, frequently falling into states of unconsciousness mid-conversation and muttering to yourself like an absent-minded fool. However, the moment the two minds touched, an intellectual spark exploded. You both realize you share the same ideological blood, a skeptical Whiggism, a commitment to commercial liberty, and the rule of law and scientific inquiry, all stripped of the religious superstition. Hume sees in you an architect of new systems, while you find in him a brave companion. He is willing to be the lightning rod, taking all the storms from the church regarding the crime of atheism, creating a safe space for you to silently perfect your thoughts. Over long evenings with bottles of red wine and the flickering firelight, the two of you debated the nature of man. Hume taught you that you cannot derive aught from is. And from there, you began to build a new moral system based on sympathy. The human ability to place oneself in the position of another, to judge one's own behavior. This friendship is not just a spiritual comfort, it is the launch pad for all the greatest things you will do later. You realize that Hume is the person approaching as nearly to the idea of a perfectly wise and virtuous man. This harmony dispels the darkness of solitude that once surrounded you at Oxford. Hume introduces you to the Select Society, where the elite of the Scottish Enlightenment converge. You sit around a large oak table, surrounded by the most brilliant minds of the era. Judges in their majestic wigs, progressive ministers, compassionate doctors, and merchants carrying the breath of reality. Tobacco smoke from clay pipes drifts in the air, mingling with the rich scent of coffee. Here, you are no longer a clumsy scholar. When you speak of the connection between morality and commerce, the whole room falls silent. You debate how a society can operate without sacred commands from above. You see, your philosophy is no longer abstract reflection. It is being sharpened through the practical experiences of those directly managing society. The discussions at the Select Society taught you that the prosperity of a nation cannot be separated from the virtue of its citizens. You learn to observe the interaction between self-interest and sympathy right at the dinner table, through how people treat each other to be respected. Edinburgh has turned you into a man of society, a true thinker, ready to bring light to the darkest corners of the old economic system. In 1751, significant news arrived from the West. The University of Glasgow, your old school where you once studied under Francis Hutcheson, invited you to take the position of Professor of Logic. It was the result of 3 brilliant years in Edinburgh, of support from Hume and Lord Kames. You stand before the mirror, adjusting your old cloak, feeling a confidence like never before. You have overcome the collapse at Oxford, overcome the obscurity in Kirkcaldy to step onto the podium of one of Scotland's most prestigious universities. Your great career is only now truly beginning. You pack up notebooks filled with entries on rhetoric and economics, letters to your mother, and small gifts from Hume. You feel a sense of wholeness, a connection between what you have learned and what you are about to teach. The painful past has become the fuel for the fire of knowledge within you. You look out the window, seeing the gray stone rooftops of Edinburgh gradually fading in the morning mist, your heart full of gratitude for this city that welcomed you when you had nothing in your hands. The knock of the coachman interrupts your train of thought. You carry the wooden trunk heavy with manuscripts, stepping out of the small rented room that has been your home for 3 years. You take a deep breath of the chilly, damp air of Edinburgh one last time before stepping into the carriage. The shadows of early morning still cover the sloping roads, and the sound of wheels grinding on cobblestones echoes dryly as the carriage begins to move west, taking you back to Glasgow, where even greater lectures and ideas are waiting to be awakened. The grinding of the carriage wheels on the cobblestone streets of Glasgow carries a rhythm that is both strange and familiar. You lean your head against the side of the carriage, feeling the chill of that January morning in 1751 seep through your thick wool cloak. Before you, the ancient bell towers of the University of Glasgow emerge from the gray mist blowing in from the River Clyde. 14 years ago, you walked through these gates as a shy teenager. Now, at the age of 27, you return as a professor of logic, a miraculous turn of fate. You enter the campus, leather shoes rhythmic on the worn stones, sensing the scent of old books, pine wood, and the familiar smell of coal smoke. You stand at the podium, taking a deep breath of the thick academic air. You do not merely teach dry structures of argument. You bring the breath of rhetoric and belles lettres. You want your students not only to know how to think, but how to persuade, how to communicate truth in its clearest form. But this position is only the beginning. Only a year later, in 1752, you stand before an even greater threshold, the chair of Professor of Moral Philosophy, the very seat once held by your late teacher, Francis Hutcheson. You feel the weight of the legacy on your shoulders. Moral philosophy at this time is not a narrow subject. It is a universe encompassing everything from theology and law to economics. You admit in your heart that this is by far the most useful, and therefore by far the happiest and most honorable period of my life. You begin a golden era, where every morning stepping onto the podium is a moment of weaving the threads between knowledge and human existence. Listen to the rustle of parchment and the sound of ink soaking into the quill nib in your study. You divide your lectures into 4 coherent parts, like 4 pillars supporting a castle of knowledge. First is natural theology, where you and your students trace the marks of God through the lens of reason. Next is ethics, the heart of the reflections you are nurturing. Then jurisprudence, studying the origins of justice and property rights. And finally, the part you call expediency, revenue, and arms. Here, within these gray stone walls, the seeds of economic liberty begin to sprout. However, standing at the podium is not easy for you. Initially, your voice is often harsh and stammering. You have a habit of leaning your head against the wall behind you, eyes staring into a void before the words begin. You do not have the brilliant charisma of Hutcheson, but you have a strange sensitivity to people. You find a particular face in the crowd of students. A certain student with a plain but expressive countenance was of great use to me. If he leaned forward to listen, all was right, and I knew that I had the ear of my class. But if he leaned back in an attitude of listlessness, I felt at once that all was wrong and that I must change either the subject or the style of my address. You teach 6 days a week, without notes, letting the arguments flow from a brain working with extraordinary intensity. Every day, You sharpen your system of thought through the eyes of the young, turning abstract concepts into vivid truths. But your life is not confined to the lecture hall. Step outside, where Glasgow in the 1750s is transforming into a workshop of the Enlightenment. You walk along the docks, hearing the clamor of newly docked ships carrying tobacco from afar. You see the tobacco lords walking proudly in their brilliant scarlet cloaks, a symbol of ultimate wealth. The smell of sea salt blending with the pungent tobacco leaves creates an air where you can smell prosperity. This is your living laboratory. Commerce and money are no longer Latin figures in books. They are the heartbeat of this city. You participate in the literary society, debating chemistry with Joseph Black, the power of steam with James Watt. You see a new world being molded by human hands. Yet, amidst these brilliant minds, you maintain the appearance of an absent-minded scholar to an eccentric degree. You live a quiet bachelor life in a house with your mother, Margaret, and cousin Janet. Neighbors often see you with a strange vermicular walk, lips muttering incessantly, smiling at invisible friends in your mind. There was a time during a visit to a tannery with Charles Townshend, you were so engrossed in explaining the division of labor that you did not watch your step. And suddenly, you fell into a tanning pit full of disgusting fat and lime. You found yourself submerged in the murky, foul water, while those around you frantically pulled you out. Or another morning, deep in thought, you absent-mindedly put a piece of bread and butter into the teapot instead of tea leaves, poured in boiling water, and took a sip. You complained to your mother that it was the worst cup of tea I have ever had. This contrast is ironic. A mind that can perceive the laws of an entire empire cannot control its own feet or a morning cup of tea. But it is precisely that detachment from physical reality that allows you to see the deeper laws of the human soul. And then, the stillness of the teaching years crystallized into a masterpiece. In April 1759, you published your first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. You set pen to paper to challenge the ghost of Thomas Hobbes, who always claimed humans were merely selfish creatures, how selfish soever man may be supposed. There are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. You introduce the world to sympathy, not as weak pity, but as the miraculous capacity of the mind that allows us to step into the shoes of others. And above all, you create the concept of the impartial spectator. You describe this judge as an objective observer sitting deep within each person's mind, helping us judge our own behavior not out of fear of God, but out of a desire for social acceptance. To demonstrate the power and limits of morality, you give the example of an earthquake in China. You write that if a man in Europe hears news of millions in China being swallowed by an earthquake, he will sigh, say a few philosophical words, and go to sleep soundly. But if he knows that tomorrow he will lose his little finger, he will stay awake all night in panic. A bitter contrast of human nature. But why do we not commit atrocities to save our finger? It is because the impartial spectator reminds us that we are but one individual in a crowd, and hurting another is an unpardonable baseness. Your book does not need warnings from heaven. It finds morality right in the interaction between human beings. The world's reaction exceeded your expectations. You received a letter from your best friend, David Hume, who had always urged you to publish these thoughts. Hume, with his usual wit, wrote a long letter full of fake complaints about the book being criticized, only to reveal his hand at the end. The mob of literati are already very loud in its praises. Your book became a phenomenon in the salons of London. Edmund Burke called it one of the most beautiful fabrics of moral theory. A delightful irony emerged. Your book explained morality through empirical psychology, setting theology aside, yet it made the church bishops extremely fond of it. You suddenly became a renowned philosopher across Europe, no longer a provincial professor from far-off Scotland. That fame flew across the channel, reaching the ears of Charles Townshend, a powerful British politician. Townshend was so impressed by your intellect that he made an offer that completely changed the trajectory of your life. He wanted to invite you to be the tutor for his stepson, the young Duke of Buccleuch, on a grand tour of Europe. The salary was £300 a year, plus a lifelong pension. It was a ticket to permanent financial freedom, so you would no longer have to worry about sustenance and could focus solely on even greater writings. You stood before a difficult choice. Leave the familiar podium or seize the opportunity to expand your horizons to the world. At the end of 1763, you made your final decision. You submitted your resignation to the University of Glasgow. On the last day, while standing at the podium, the air seemed thick with regret. You looked at the young faces who had accompanied you for 12 years. With your inherent integrity, you tried to return the tuition fees to the students because you were leaving before the term ended, but a touching scene unfolded. Your students unanimously refused. They grabbed your cloak, surrounded you, and decisively would not take the money back. They insisted that what you had taught them was worth more than any shilling. You stood there, clumsy and moved, feeling the sincere affection of your pupils. You realized you had truly touched their souls. You packed your luggage, carrying the shaping manuscripts on economics, the letters from Hume, and the love of your mother Margaret. At age 40, you walked out of the gates of Glasgow for the last time, preparing to cross the English Channel to the magnificence of France. You were no longer an observer in the shadows. You were stepping into the light of history. The rhythmic splashing of waves against the side of the ship begins to drown out the memories of Glasgow. You stand on the deck, feeling the salty sea breeze blow through your cloak, eyes fixed on the horizon where the coast of France is gradually appearing in the purple glow of sunset. The scratching of the quill pen on the final sheet of parchment. A decisive yet reflective sound in the quiet study at Glasgow. You set the pen down, staring at the completed resignation letter. It is January 1764. You are 40 years old, an age where people usually choose stability over uncertain adventures. But Charles Townshend's offer is like a magnetic force, pulling you out of the comfort zone of the professor's podium. You think of Henry Scott, the young Duke of Buccleuch, whom you must lead through the capitals of Europe, a job your colleagues mockingly call a luxury nanny. But in your heart, you know this is a stroke of genius trade-off. The salary of £300 per year, and especially the equivalent lifelong pension, have opened the door you have always craved: permanent financial independence. You are buying time. You are buying the freedom to write great things without being shackled by lesson plans or committee meetings. On your last day standing at the podium, you feel an indescribable lump in your throat. With extreme integrity, you try to return every shilling of tuition to your students. "I cannot take money without teaching the full term," you mutter in your rough voice. But those young men grab your cloak, surrounding their absent-minded teacher and decisively refusing. "Professor, what you have taught us is worth far more than these coins," one student says firmly. You stand there, clumsy and moved, feeling the warmth of respect one last time before stepping out of the gates toward a wider world. The freezing wind from the English Channel blows through your cloak as the ship begins to leave Dover. The roar of waves crashing against the hull blends with the shouts of sailors pulling the sails. You stand beside the 8-year-old Duke and his younger brother, Hugh Scott, looking toward the horizon where France emerges behind a purple mist. This is your first time leaving your island, beginning a journey that will last nearly 3 years. After a few brief days in magnificent Paris, you find yourself in a jolting carriage heading south to Toulouse, a peaceful provincial city by the poetic Garonne River, but lacking the intellectual vibrancy you are accustomed to. Here, you spend 18 long months in a terrifying stillness. Your French, with its heavy Scottish accent, becomes a barrier separating you from the local nobility. You feel like a strange creature, lost in a world without an echo. During long afternoons, you sit by the window, looking out at the red roofs and distant vineyards, feeling a deep longing for Glasgow. "I have begun to write a book in order to pass the time," you write to David Hume in a moment of vulnerability. "That boredom is the smelting furnace." In the absolute solitude of Toulouse, ideas about capital, the division of labor, and the workings of the market begin to crystallize on paper. The greatest book in economic history, The Wealth of Nations, was conceived from this very stillness. You realize that sometimes the silence of the outside world is the noise necessary to awaken the deep sounds within the intellect. Step into Geneva, the city of clear blue lakes and strict Protestant spirit, which brings you a sense of closeness, as if you were back home in Scotland. But the most miraculous thing awaits you in an ancient mansion. You stand before the door of the study of Voltaire, Europe's greatest writer, whose portrait you have hung prominently in Glasgow for years. As the door opens, a man in his 70s sits, thin but with eyes still brilliant with wit and satire, appears. Voltaire looks at you, the awkward Scottish professor, and smiles. You find yourself facing an intellect that has destroyed so many dogmas with ridicule. The two of you converse about philosophy, humanity, and the operation of society. You are impressed by his sharpness, but in your heart, you maintain a different perspective. You want to be a builder, not just a destroyer. Voltaire, after the meeting, remarks about you with rare respect. An excellent man, with nothing of the pedant about him. You leave Geneva with a firmer belief in the path you are choosing. The intersection of Voltaire's enthusiasm and your caution has created a new rhythm for your own thinking. You look back at Lake Geneva one last time, feeling the peace of the water before returning to the bustle of Paris. Paris, in late 1765, appears before you as a feast for the senses, the heavy scent of perfume mingling with the smell of fragrant candle smoke in prestigious salons, the rustle of expensive silk dresses, and the sparkling laughter of the elite. Thanks to Hume's letters of introduction, you are welcomed as a guest of honor. In the salon of Madame Riccoboni, you become the most absent-minded creature they have ever seen. You frequently mutter to yourself in the middle of glamorous conversations, sometimes staring at a statue with a tranced gaze, but they love you. They see in that awkwardness a deep intellect that disregards superficial vanities. You dine with Benjamin Franklin, observing the calm of the man from the New World. And then you enter the world of Francois Quesnay and the physiocrats. Quesnay, a court physician, viewed the economy through the lens of medicine. You stand beside him, looking at the Tableau économique, where he describes the circulation of wealth like blood flowing through the human body, a powerful metaphor that imprints on your mind. Laissez-faire et laissez-passer, le monde va de lui, même. You hear them declare that only agriculture creates value, while commerce and industry are sterile. You vehemently reject that view. In your head, the image of the nail makers in Kirkcaldy returns. You know that production also creates immense added value, but you still admire them. You consider their system the nearest approach to the truth yet published. Long evenings of intense debate with Turgot on the nature of value helped you sharpen your logical blade. You realize that freedom is not just a moral concept, it is a physical law of society. A controlled economy is like a body with blocked blood vessels. It will weaken and perish. But France is not just the brightly lit salons. You step out of Paris, passing through the wretchedly poor countryside. You see thin, ragged peasants tilling barren land. Their extreme poverty stands like a dark scar beside the magnificent luxury of the Palace of Versailles. You see grain warehouses sealed due to bad trade regulations while people are starving right next to them. This contrast makes your heart ache. These practical observations become vivid evidence for the arguments you are writing. You understand that a bad policy is not just an academic error, it is a crime against humanity. You see the rot of a state apparatus that is too bloated and arbitrary. The more you observe, the more you believe that the key to prosperity lies in individual freedom and the simplicity of law. You feel a strong urge to complete your book, to bring the light of reason to places sinking in the darkness of mismanagement. Paris showed you the peak of intellect, but the French countryside showed you the depth of human suffering. Both molded a more complete, sharper, and more compassionate Adam Smith. On an October evening in 1766, a sudden darkness falls over the journey at its peak. In a rented room in Paris, Hugh Scott, the young and vibrant younger brother of the Duke, suddenly falls ill. You stand by the boy's bed, watching that youthful face turn pale under a violent fever. The best French doctors are summoned, but death seems to have decided to take him. How Scott passed away after just a few days. A mourning silence envelops the party. You find yourself no longer a tutor, but a father figure, a comforter for the Duke who is collapsing in grief. You help him prepare the final procedures to bring his brother's body back home. Before this pain could subside, other news comes from London. Charles Townshend, your powerful patron, has also passed away forever in his 50s. This event is like an abrupt cut in the scene of fate. The European tour officially closes in sorrow. You leave Paris in November 1766, carrying the body of Hugh Scott and a soul that has aged many years. You have passed through glories and tragedies, debated with the greatest minds, and witnessed the greatest sufferings. You are no longer the provincial professor of old. You have become a world intellectual, carrying a massive volume of notes and permanent financial independence. You are ready to return to the stillness of home, where your greatest work awaits completion. The sound of waves splashing against the hull as you cross the English Channel back to Britain carries a somber but steadfast echo. You lean your head against the side of the ship, watching the sparkling lights of the French coast recede into the night, hands tightly clutching the wooden chest containing the first manuscripts of the Wealth of Nations. The north wind sweeps across the deck, fluttering your cloak as you take your first steps onto English soil, beginning the long journey back to your mother's house in Kirkcaldy amidst the northern mist. The pungent scent of sea salt blending with the coal smoke from the naileries begins to fill your lungs as the carriage stops before your old house in Kirkcaldy. It is May 1767. You step down from the vehicle, your legs slightly unsteady after the long journey back from the south. At the age of 44, you bring with you heavy wooden trunks containing not gold or silver, but pieces of your soul, thousands of pages of notes, precious books from Paris, and unfinished manuscripts waiting to be awakened. You look up at the gray stone roofs of the Lang Toon, feeling a strange peace enveloping you. You have passed through the most magnificent salons of Paris, debated with the greatest minds in Europe, but in the end, it is the salty breath of your homeland where you choose to rest. The absolute financial security from the Duke of Buccleuch's pension of £300 a year has granted you a privilege few scholars ever possess: freedom. You are no longer required to stand at a podium, no longer worried about spare shillings to sustain your life. You have bought time, and now time is your only companion in the labor of creating a new world on paper. You enter the house, seeing the familiar silhouettes of your mother, Margaret, and your cousin Janet waiting. You surrender yourself to their care, a steadfast petticoat government, ready to shield you from every distraction of the world. The sound of the waves whispering outside acts as a steady rhythm, soothing your mind for your greatest years of solitude. Listen to the scratching of the nib on parchment in the quiet nights at Kirkcaldy. In a study filled with the scent of ink and candle wax, you begin to mold massive amounts of material into a complete system of reasoning. You thought it would take only a few months to finish, but the work grows larger and larger, like a living creature finding its own form. You are no longer writing a mere policy essay. You are decoding the structure of commercial society. Your extreme perfectionism means you are never satisfied with what you have just written. Every figure on the price of silver in Peru, every line of history regarding universities is scrutinized dozens of times. A slow and very slow workman who does and undo everything I write at least half a dozen times before I can be tolerably pleased with it. You mortify yourself in these reflections. Your life gradually takes on the appearance of an ascetic monk. You wake before dawn, burying yourself in stacks of manuscripts, and your only pleasure is the long, solitary walks by the seaside. You find yourself becoming thoroughly Scottish, cutting off all contact with the outside world. You mutter to yourself on the sand, smiling at invisible friends in your mind, while seagulls wheel overhead as witnesses to the birth of a masterpiece. This solitude is not a prison. It is a cathedral where you are forging the logical weapons to shatter the darkness of mercantilism. But that stillness does not please your closest friend, David Hume. From vibrant London, Hume constantly sends letters carrying the breath of the era, urging you to leave Kirkcaldy. To Hume, prolonged solitude is a poison that can ravage the spirit of a philosopher. He calls your hometown a profane place and earnestly requests your return to the intellectual community. You read those letters by candlelight, smiling at your friend's concern but resolutely ignoring it. You know you are in a state of trance that only the silence of Kirkcaldy can maintain. You need the rhythmic beat of the hammers from the distant naileries to provide the tempo for your pages on the division of labor. You need the salty sea air to keep your intellect sharp amidst the maze of customs figures. You lock yourself between pages, refusing every distraction, determined to sharpen your system of reasoning to a razor's edge. You understand that you carry a mission to illuminate the invisible hand, coordinating the prosperity of humanity. And to do so, you are willing to become an invisible man in the eyes of the world for years on end. Suddenly, in 1772, an economic earthquake erupts, completely breaking your stillness. The collapse of the air bank is like a bucket of cold water thrown onto the theories you are nurturing. You witness close friends falling into bankruptcy overnight. The credit bubble bursts, exposing the recklessness of speculators who issued paper money indiscriminately. Even your source of livelihood, the fortune of the Duke of Buccleuch, is violently shaken. You are forced to leave your desk, stepping out to participate in efforts to rescue the local economy. This is no longer theory in books. This is a brutal laboratory of reality. You see the savings of the people consumed by hollow values, and from this pain, your thinking undergoes a profound transformation. You realize that a free market does not mean an anarchic chaos. You begin to rewrite the chapters on currency and banking. You set boundaries, strict regulations to restrain the greed of bankers. You come up with a highly figurative metaphor. These regulations are like the government requiring contractors to build party walls between houses. Individual liberty must be limited when the recklessness of one individual might set fire to the houses of all his neighbors. You are no longer a fanatic blindly defending the market. You have become an intellectual legislator, understanding that freedom is only truly sustainable when placed upon a foundation of law and morality. Excessive intellectual labor begins to exhaust your strength as you turn 50. The nervous fits and digestive pains you once suffered at Oxford return, more violent than ever. Your hand begins to tremble. Every stroke of the pen becomes a painful struggle. You frequently fall into states of melancholy and extreme anxiety. Medicine calls it inveterate hypochondriasis, but in truth, it is the cry for help from a body neglected in thought. The obsession with death begins to creep into your mind. You look at the sprawling mess of manuscripts, fearing that you will pass away before fulfilling the greatest wish of your life. You do not fear death. You only fear your thoughts being misunderstood by future generations or left unfinished. In early 1773, before preparing for a long trip to London, you perform a decisive act, drafting your academic will. You appoint David Hume as the executor of your literary estate. You strictly instruct Hume that, should anything happen, he must burn all your papers, fragments, and unfinished manuscripts. You would rather your thoughts turn to ashes than have the world see what has not been polished to perfection. The pride of a philosopher allows no imperfection to exist. You clutch the letter to Hume, feeling the weight of responsibility and the fragility of human existence. On a spring morning in 1773, you stand before the gates of your old house in Kirkcaldy to bid farewell to your mother, Margaret. This time, you are not traveling for leisure. You are going to face destiny in London. You carry a wooden chest containing the massive manuscript of The Wealth of Nations, which you believe is almost complete. You kiss the forehead of your mother, who has been the only anchor of your life for all these years. The sea wind blows hard, fluttering your cloak as you step into the carriage heading south. You look back at the coastal town one last time, where for 6 years you lived as a hermit to cultivate truths for humanity. You do not know that this trip will last another 3 years, as upheavals from the American colonies will force you to tear down and rebuild your arguments. But it was in Kirkcaldy that the core principles of the division of labor and capital accumulation were truly forged into shape. You lean back against the side of the carriage, closing your eyes to listen to the clatter of horse hooves on the cobblestones, heart full of determination but also carrying a strange peace. The sound of the carriage wheels rolling steadily along the road takes you away from the sound of the waves of your home, moving toward the thick mist and the flickering oil lamps of London. You feel the chill of the south awaiting you as the shadows of dusk begin to stretch long over the vast fields before your eyes. The sound of wooden wheels grinding on the cobblestone streets of London carries a driving rhythm quite different from the stillness of Kirkcaldy. You lean back against the jolting carriage, hands clutching the massive wooden chest containing the manuscript of your life's work. It is 1773. London welcomes you with the pungent scent of coal smoke, the cries of street vendors, and the bustle of an empire at the height of its power. But in your soul, a shadow of melancholy surrounds you. 6 years of seclusion at home have exhausted your strength. Nervous breakdowns make your hands sometimes tremble uncontrollably, and the obsession with near death grows larger. You fear you will pass away while the masterpiece is still fragmented notes. Therefore, the first thing you do upon arrival is send a letter to your soulmate, David Hume. You appoint him as the executor of your literary will, with a fierce instruction. If anything happens, the entire manuscript must be burned immediately. You would rather your thoughts turn to ashes than have the world see an imperfect Adam Smith. But London does not allow you to rest. This city is a massive archive. You spend hours every day in the British Museum, burying yourself in customs reports, statistics on corn prices, and herring industry bounties. You are putting flesh on the skeleton of your reasoning with thick empirical data. You join the literary club, sitting at the same table as Edward Gibbon and Samuel Johnson. Amidst glamorous debates, you often sit in silence, lips muttering to yourself because your mind is preoccupied with solving complex economic problems. London is a brilliant laboratory, but also a place that prolonged your labor for another 3 long years. Each day that passes, you tear down and rebuild your arguments, waiting for a ripe moment to give birth to a new era. And then, the 9th of March, 1776, arrived. A day when the whole world seemed to hold its breath. An inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations is officially published. 2 thick volumes, carrying the smell of fresh ink and the value of £2, sit prominently in London bookshops. A historical event taking place just as the first gunshots of the American Revolution are echoing. You have carried out a very violent attack upon the whole commercial system of Great Britain. You stand there, looking at those holding your book and smiling bitterly at the old mercantilism. Those who believe wealth is gold and silver stored in the king's treasury. You reject it all. You declare that gold and silver are but vanities, and real wealth must be the annual produce of the land and labor of the society. Prosperity does not lie in the safes of tyrants. It lies in the hands of ordinary working people. You redefine the world through a pragmatic yet humane lens. You see wealth as the source, providing the necessities and conveniences for every human being. Your book is not just economics. It is a declaration of independence for human thought, where the value of a nation is measured by the happiness and fulfillment of its lowliest citizens. Step into your mind to admire the beauty of the division of labor. You lead the audience into a small pin factory filled with the clanging of hammers and the heat of molten iron. You observe a clumsy worker. If he did every stage alone, he might only fashion a single pin in a whole day. But look, when you divide the work into 18 distinct operations, one man draws out the wire, another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it. 10 workers can produce 48,000 pins every day. A miraculous explosion of productivity through specialization. You realize that social progress lies in how we delicately depend on one another. From the small pin factory, you see the operation of an entire empire. And then, you reflect on the paradox of value. You hold a glass of clear water and look at a sparkling diamond. A truly ironic contrast. Nothing is more useful than water, but it will purchase scarce anything. A diamond, on the contrary, has scarce any value in use, but a very great quantity of other goods may frequently be had in exchange for it. You distinguish between use value and exchange value, asserting that labor is the true measure of everything in the world. You are teaching the world how to perceive the nature of things behind their glamorous appearances. In the maze of London's streets, you synthesize an eternal truth about human nature. You know we are not angels. We act out of self-interest. You mutter the words that have become immortal. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. We appeal to their self-love, not their humanity. But the most miraculous thing, what makes your heart skip a beat, is the invisible hand. You imagine a silent force leading millions of individuals pursuing their own interests, only to unintentionally create a good common order for the whole society. Though you wrote this phrase only once, it became the soul of the book. You do not believe in kings commanding from above. You believe in the self-regulation of the free market. However, you are not naive. You are always wary of a conspiracy against the public by merchants to raise prices. You propose a system of natural liberty where the government does only 3 things: protecting the nation, maintaining justice, and building public works. You want a compact but strict state, so that every individual can shine in their space of freedom. Amidst the noise of London, your mind turns toward the American colonies. Rising tensions break your heart, but it is vivid evidence for what you are writing. You expose the tyranny of the East India Company, calling it a combination of the worst negligence of a trader with the worst tyranny of a despot. You advise Britain to awaken from the golden dream of empire. You want to give Americans representation or total independence to build an equal free trade relationship. You foresee the collapse of the colonies if we continue to stifle them with unjust taxes. Your book has just been born, and 1,000 copies sold out in 6 months. People like Edward Gibbon and Edmund Burke praised it as a comprehensive illumination. But amidst all these praises, you only wait for one single letter from Edinburgh. And then, it arrived. The letter from David Hume, who was battling terminal cancer. Huge. Bell. Dear Mr. Smith, I am much pleased with your performance. Hume praised the depth and solidity of the work. It was a compliment more precious than any award. But the end of the letter brings tears to your eyes. My health is very much broken. You realize that just as you reach the peak of glory, you are about to lose your closest soulmate. The summer of 1776 became the most painful period of your life. You hurried back to Scotland to see Hume for the last time. On the 8th of August, 1776, You sat by his bedside, looking at his thin face, still radiating his usual wit. Hume laughed and spoke of bargaining with Charon the ferryman taking souls across the river Styx. He wanted to postpone death just a little while to see how the public received your book. The courage and tranquility in the face of death from an atheist like him were etched deep into your soul. On August 25, Hume passed away peacefully. This event shook the religious authorities, who always expected him to die in regret. You could not remain silent before that injustice. In 1777, you published a letter to Strahan, publicly describing Hume's virtuous final days. You solemnly declared, "I have always considered him as approaching as nearly to the idea of a perfectly wise and virtuous man." This affirmation immediately ignited a storm of criticism. Monks in Oxford and London frantically attacked you. They insulted you more violently than when you attacked the empire's commercial system. You realize a bitter irony. Protecting a friend caused you 10 times more abuse than changing the history of economics. At 53, standing at the peak of fame, you feel completely alone. Your only soulmate has gone far away, leaving you alone with the light of the wealth of nations beginning to spread across the world. The light from the candle on your desk begins to flicker as darkness covers the rented room in London. You put Hume's letter into a secret drawer, feeling a deep void in your chest. You stand up, walk to the window, looking at the dim oil lamps on the street, where people are still toiling for the livelihood you have just decoded. The sound of the clock bell from afar echoes, signaling a new day about to begin, urging you to pack up the last files to prepare for a new chapter of life in Edinburgh, where administrative duties await you in the shadow of loss. The sound of leather shoes beats steadily on the cold stones of the Royal Exchange in the heart of Edinburgh, a dry sound, echoing into the soaring corridors. You push the heavy wooden door, entering your new office. It is the year 1778. You are 55 years old, a world-famous philosopher, the father of the wealth of nations. A man who has just fiercely attacked the system of tariffs and protectionism. Now, you sit down in an old leather chair with thick stacks of customs files before you. A great irony is unfolding. You, who once called the mercantile system a collection of mean and malignant expedients, have officially become the Commissioner of Customs in Scotland. A turning point that surprises even your closest friends. But life is full of contradictions, just like your own theories. With a salary of £600 a year from the state, plus the £300 pension from the Duke of Buccleuch, you suddenly possess a wealth of £900 per year. You stand at the peak of both intellectual and material richness. You smell the printing ink, the old parchment, and the sweat of merchants waiting for approval. You look through the window down at the streets of Edinburgh, where people operate the very system you once wanted to dismantle. You smile, a smile tinged with self-mockery. You realize that no matter how lofty philosophy may be, social order still needs diligent hands to maintain it. And you, with all your integrity, are ready to be that hand, even if it seems to go against what you once wrote. You do not treat this position as an idle perk. Listen to the rustle of customs pages as you flip through them 4 days a week. You work with an obsessive meticulousness, just as you once observed the nail makers in your youth. You check every salt tax figure, investigate reports on tea smuggling, and directly participate in litigations with shrewd merchants. You remember the lazy professors at Oxford and promise yourself never to be like them. To you, The law was the law until Parliament changed it. You believe in free trade, but you believe in justice and civic duty above all else. There are times you are so firm as to propose using the military to suppress reckless tea smugglers. But then, one morning, that integrity faces a delightful personal challenge. You stand before your wardrobe at Panmure House, touching the ruffles and luxurious wool clothes. A thought flashes, making you stop. You realize some of these items were smuggled into Britain without paying tax. Without a second's hesitation, you gather them and walk to the blazing fireplace. You watch the fine fibers begin to be licked by the flames, smoking and turning to ash. You write to your friend, telling of how you personally destroyed the clothes because he suspected they were smuggled. A marvelous contrast between a pragmatic philosopher and an incorruptible official. You would rather sacrifice personal comforts than let the honor of a law enforcer be tarnished. You stand quietly before the fire, feeling the heat on your face, heart light as if a smudge on your consciousness has just been cleansed. Leaving the ink smoke-filled office, you return to Panmure House, an ancient mansion in the misty Canongate district. The door opens. The smell of hot soup and fragrant candle wax welcomes you. Here, you are no longer the stern commissioner of customs. You are the son of Mother Margaret. She, though having reached the age of 80, remains the steadiest anchor of your life. Together with your cousin, Janet Douglas, they have created a wonderful petticoat government. They shield you from the noise of the world, managing everything from meals to the smallest chores, so you can freely immerse yourself in your world of imagination. You love this order. You like sitting by the fireplace, listening to Margaret read, or simply feeling her presence in the next room. This peace is the only energy source helping you withstand the pressures of public duty. You feel cocooned in a silk thread of love and empathy. At Panmure House, everything moves in a slow, relaxed rhythm. You look at your mother, seeing that time seems to have stopped on her face. You realize that no matter how much the world outside changes, no matter how wealthy you become, this house and these people are your true wealth of nations. You close your eyes, letting the warmth of family seep into your flesh, driving away the chill of the Edinburgh cobblestones. And then, every Sunday evening, Panmure House glows with light. Your Sunday suppers have become legendary. Imagine the large dining room, where red wine sparkles under candlelight and tobacco smoke drifts lazily. Around the dining table are the greatest minds of the era. Joseph Black is speaking of latent heat. James Hutton explains the formation of deep time, and James Watt enthusiastically tells of steam engine improvements. You sit there, the host of the party, but sometimes completely vanish into your own reflections. You often sink into silence, smiling at invisible friends, or muttering arguments to yourself. Some female guests look at you and think you are criticizing the food, but Joseph Black only laughs and shakes his head. He knows you are traveling through galaxies of ideas. But when a topic on human nature or law erupts, you suddenly return. You speak of sympathy, of how society self-adjusts. Your voice becomes clear, logical, and captivating for hours on end. These dinners are where the Scottish Enlightenment reaches its purest essence. Here, knowledge is not rigid dogma. It is a living flow, an intersection of chemistry, geology, and economics. You feel happy to be part of that flow. You look at your friends, seeing the light of reason radiant on their faces, and know that humanity is turning a new page. However, there is a secret you always keep hidden behind your apparent wealth. People look at the 900-pound salary and imagine you are amassing a huge treasure. But the truth is entirely different. You live a simple, almost ascetic life. After your passing, it will be discovered that your estate has almost nothing left. You have used the majority of that money for secret charity. You quietly send money to poor students at Glasgow, support old friends in difficulty, and help the vulnerable without ever leaving a name. You practice exactly what you wrote in the theory of moral sentiments. You do not help others for praise, but because the impartial spectator in your mind demands it. You find the pleasure of seeing it, even though you derive nothing from it. Your generosity is like the invisible hand in economics. It operates silently, but brings warmth to the darkest corners of society. You walk on Canongate Street, see a beggar, and smile as you hand them a coin, then walk on alone, not looking back. To you, money is only a tool to spread empathy, a means to turn moral theory into living action. In the evenings at Panmure House, when the guests have departed, you sit at the writing desk once more. Perfectionism has never left you. You spend time revising The Wealth of Nations for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th editions. You add practical experiences from the customs industry, fiercely criticizing the East India Company as nuisances in every respect. You see firsthand the abuse of power and inefficiency of monopoly, and that only sharpens your arguments further. But your soul devotes more passion to the theory of moral sentiments. You are preparing for the 6th edition, the final one. You write more about the virtues necessary for a commercial society. You want the world to understand that the free market only works well when people are moral. Your position now is unshakable by anyone. In 1783, you became a founding member of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. In 1787, you were elected rector of the University of Glasgow. You see, Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger began to apply your policies. In a meeting, he waited for you to sit down first and said, "Sir, we are all your scholars." You feel a quiet pride. The seeds you sowed in Kirkcaldy have become great trees shading an entire kingdom. You look at the manuscripts, feeling an intellectual wholeness, but also realize your time is gradually running out. On an afternoon in May 1784, a deadly silence enveloped Panmure House. Your mother, Margaret Douglas, took her last breath at 90. You stand by her bed, holding the thin hands that once carried you after that kidnapping years ago. All fame, money, and intellect become meaningless now. The only and strongest emotional bond of your life has been severed. You feel very helpless without her. A part of your soul has followed her. From that moment, your health begins to collapse rapidly. Chronic bowel diseases and cystitis begin to attack you. The pain makes it impossible to eat or sleep. You lose weight. Your face becomes haggard, and your hands tremble so much you cannot hold a pen. The man who once walked for miles now feels exhausted after just a few steps. You look at the 18 volumes of unfinished manuscripts in the study and feel extreme anxiety. You fear that death will take away control over your legacy. You begin to withdraw, preparing for the final battle with fate. Every night, you listen to the church bells and the wind whistling through the door cracks, sensing the darkness of the end gradually overwhelming the light of knowledge. You sit quietly in the shadows of the library, thin hands trembling as they touch the spines of old leather books. The light from the fireplace dances on the wall, creating strange shapes like ghosts of the past surrounding you. The gentle knock from Janet interrupts the somber thoughts, reminding you that it is time to rest. As outside, the Edinburgh mist has begun to sweep through the alleys, covering the gray stone roofs of Canongate with a hazy veil. The sharp pain in the abdomen strikes again, dull and persistent, like an uncompromising reminder of the finiteness of human life. You shiver slightly, tightening your thick wool cloak around your thin shoulders as you sit at your writing desk at Panmure House. It is the final days of the 1780s. Outside, Edinburgh is sinking into the gray mist of dusk, but inside this room, the flickering candlelight is just enough to illuminate the sprawling stacks of manuscripts. At 60, your body has become a battlefield of chronic diseases. The years of staying up late, irregular eating, and sitting hunched for hours to mold great thoughts are now demanding their debt. You feel the obstruction in your bowels, the burning of cystitis, and the agonizing pain from hemorrhoids. Every breath carries an exhausting fatigue. You look at your trembling hands, the hands that once wrote words that changed the flow of history, now struggling to hold a quill pen steady. The greatness of the intellect seems inversely proportional to the collapse of the body. You feel like a machine that has operated over capacity, its gears gradually worn and rusted under the weight of time. But amidst those physical pains, the fire of reason within you still burns bright, a heartbreaking clarity as you realize your time is draining away like sand through fingers. The silence in Panmure House now carries a strangely mournful and hollow color. You look at the empty chair by the fireplace, where your mother, Margaret Douglas, had sat for more than half a century. Her passing in 1784 took away the last anchor, holding you to the world of emotion. You realize that, despite becoming a world-renowned philosopher and a powerful commissioner of customs, you are forever the little child longing for a mother's warmth and protection. Janet Douglas, your loyal cousin, still quietly moves about the house, trying to maintain the petticoat government to care for you, but that warmth cannot fill the vast void your mother left behind. You frequently find yourself sinking into lonely silences, standing by the window looking out at Canongate Street, where passing footsteps become strange and meaningless. The habit of walking miles every day for reflection is now only a memory. You can only walk a few blocks before your chest tightens, your weary legs forcing you to return to the stillness of the library. Solitude surrounds you like a salt mist, numbing earthly emotions, leaving only one obsession: to complete what remains unfinished before death knocks at the door. Your mind still operates with extraordinary intensity, like a final effort to resist decay. You bury yourself in revising the 6th edition of the Theory of Moral Sentiments. You persist in correcting every passage, clarifying every argument on virtue and sympathy, as if it were your most important spiritual will. Extreme perfectionism prevents you from allowing any gap in your reasoning to exist. But that very rigor pushes you into a painful loop. The more you edit, the more you see other parts needing refinement. You look at the massive volume of unpublished legacy lying silently in oak cabinets, a systematic treatise on jurisprudence, law, and government. They are the intellectual children you conceived in the solitude of Kirkcaldy and your travels in France. But under your strict eye, they are only rough pieces, drafts not yet ripe enough to face the world. A fear begins to invade your mind, the fear of being misrepresent his views, confusing his legacy. You cannot bear the idea that your reputation will be tarnished by unpolished thoughts. To you, knowledge must be perfection, or it is nothing. On an afternoon in July 1790, as the chill of death begins to seep into your very marrow, you make a shocking decision. You summon your two closest friends, Joseph Black and James Hutton, to your bedside. You look at them with sunken but determined eyes. You point toward the thick volumes of manuscripts and demand they burn them immediately. Astonishment is clear on the faces of the two great scientists. They try to negotiate, pleading with you to keep these priceless treasures of knowledge for posterity. Adam, this is your life's work. The world needs these reflections. Hutton's voice trembles. But you shake your head, breath intermittent, but will as hard as stone. You refuse to close your eyes until you see the flames consume them. Having no other choice, Black and Hutton reluctantly carry those parchments to the fireplace. You lie there, silently observing every manuscript thrown into the fire. The crackling of the flames, the smell of old paper, and pungent dry ink fill the room. The lines of law, the arguments on the history of philosophy that you spent tens of thousands of hours reflecting upon, are now turning into ash and black smoke rising from the chimney. A terrible loss for humanity, but the ultimate relief for your pride. When the final manuscript is but a flickering red ember, you breathe a sigh of relief, feeling an absolute serenity spread through your body. The burden of perfection has been lifted. You are now but a weightless soul, ready for the final journey. Strangely, after the fire died down, your spiritual strength seemed to return for a brief moment. You decided to organize a final Sunday supper at Panmure House. You wanted to see beloved faces, to breathe the air of intellect one last time. Around the dining table were still the most brilliant minds of the Scottish Enlightenment. You tried to sit upright, maintaining the polite demeanor of a Glasgow professor of years past. You looked at Joseph Black, James Hutton, and James Watt, feeling the warmth of friendship and respect enveloping the room. But as the dinner drifted late into the night, your strength was completely exhausted. You knew you could stay no longer. You laboriously stood up, glancing once more at your soulmates. A weary smile appeared on your lips as you uttered a farewell deeply imbued with Stoic philosophy. I love your company, gentlemen, but I believe I must leave you to go to another world. Or perhaps, in another line of thought, you said, I believe we must adjourn this meeting to some other place. Those words carried no trace of sorrow. They were gentle and peaceful, like a scene cut in a long play. You turned and walked away, your thin silhouette stretching across the stone floor, leaving behind friends who were silent in emotion and reverence. On the 17th of July, 1790, in the corner of the north wing of Panmure House, the world of Adam Smith officially closed. You took your last breath in absolute silence, attended by your closest friends. A bowel obstruction ended the 6-7-year journey of an extraordinary mind. You departed when everything had been meticulously arranged, from your will to the burning of the draft manuscripts. Your funeral took place simply and modestly at the Canongate Kirkyard, exactly as the wish of a man who always hated ostentation. You lie down in the cold Scottish earth, right next to the church where your mother attended service every week. The simple headstone has no grand sculptures, only recording that here lie the remains of the author of The Theory of Moral Sentiments and the Wealth of Nations. A final humility for a man who reshaped the economic foundation of all humanity. You return to Mother Earth, away from customs figures, away from nail factories and the fiery debates of London. But that silence beneath the grave was the beginning of an endless resonance through the centuries. Your final secret was only revealed when the executors opened your mailbox, a truth that shocked all who had once mocked you as a proponent of selfish greed. Despite having a massive income of £900 per year, the estate you left behind was incredibly small. It turned out that for the past 12 years, you had secretly used most of that money for secret charity. You had supported poor working families, subsidized students without tuition money, and helped old friends in distress without ever leaving a note. You practiced sympathy until your final breath, proving that the impartial spectator in your mind always triumphed over your own selfishness. You, who wrote of the invisible hand coordinating the market, were also the owner of the invisible hand of compassion, quietly soothing the pains of society. The world began to see you not just as a dry economist, but as a moral philosopher with a vast, kind heart. Your legacy lies not in the gold and silver left behind, but in the lives you saved and the free thoughts you sowed into the mind of humanity. Lying on your deathbed in the final minutes, you had secretly blamed yourself for expressing disappointment that he had not achieved more. You regretted that the legal and social systems were not yet perfected, but perhaps that very disappointment was the testament to your great stature. You always looked toward a horizon further than the naked eye could see. After you passed, obituaries in the Edinburgh and London newspapers wrote of you respectfully, but with reservation. They did not yet understand that the absent-minded professor, who often walked with a vermicular gait on Canongate Street, had just handed the world a detailed blueprint for operating the future. When the Industrial Revolution exploded, when factories sprouted like mushrooms in global trade-connected nations, people realized with shock that everything was operating exactly as you had predicted. You saw that the division of labor would liberate productivity, that the free market would eliminate poverty, and that sympathy would keep society from falling apart. Adam Smith is gone, but his thought is immortal. You have become a bronze monument in the consciousness of humanity, where whenever the world faces crises, people return to seek illumination from your invisible hand and deep compassion. The chill of the Edinburgh night seeps through the door cracks, flickering the final candle on your desk. Darkness gradually overwhelms the stacks of old books, covering the library room where you spent your life searching for truth. The clock bell from Canongate Church echoes somberly, signaling the end of a long day as your soul begins its gentle journey to another world, leaving behind a legacy that will forever burn bright like the fire in the hearth of years past. Conclusion: Adam Smith. And when the invisible hand falls into eternal sleep, the bells from Canongate Kirkyard Church ring out in somber rhythms, fading into the morning mist that embraces the gray stone roofs of Edinburgh. You lie there, feeling an absolute relief after the fire consumed the final manuscripts. The burden of perfection has turned to ash, leaving only the tranquility of an intellect that has fulfilled its mission to humanity. You find yourself walking weightlessly on the Royal Mile, no longer tormented by pain, no longer anxious about tariffs or dry customs figures. Everything now is just a beautiful dream that has been told. The invisible hand you always believed in is now soothing your very soul, taking you back to eternal silence beside your beloved mother. You look back at the world you have passed through, seeing the pin factories still producing rhythmically, seeing the ships still setting sail in search of prosperity, and knowing that you have left behind a blueprint for human happiness. The light of the final candle on the desk flickers out, giving way to the gentle and cool darkness of the long night. You take a deep breath. The scent of wet grass and damp stone from Canongate Cemetery fills your chest, an unnameable feeling of peace. You close your eyes, letting the images of Glasgow, Oxford, Paris, and Kirkcaldy fade away, like slow-motion film dissolving into the void. You have done enough. You have contributed fully. Now is the time to rest. Let your mind sink deep into the stillness of history. Sleep, a deep sleep, amidst the pages of books and immortal thoughts, in the arms of time. Sleep well. Adam Smith.